Love the British monarchy? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the To Die For Daily Podcast with Kinsey Schofield. Take it away, Kinsey.
Hi, all. Kinsey Schofield here with the To Die For Daily Podcast, and today I'm so lucky to be with the author of The Spider Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Mr. Barry Levine, talk to me about the last few weeks of your life, Barry. Have you slept? What's going on with you? You're a Jeffrey Epstein expert. You are in high demand right now.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's I'm honored to be on your podcast. This is a real absolute treat for me. We did speak a little bit the other night on a News Nation interview, but no, the past couple of weeks have been from the Epstein investigation point. There were bits and pieces, fresh information from this documents dump that continue to fill in the puzzle. I mean, I kind of look at Epstein, and through the past few years, the investigation that I did for my book, The Spider, as really one of those giant puzzles that I used to do with my daughter when she was very young.
Right.
And I was never good at the puzzles, but there were a million pieces and we had to put them all together. And, with Epstein, we still have many pieces of the puzzle board that have not been filled in. And I am hoping that if there's any plus out of this, the new public awareness and the interest from the documents release is that we will get to hopefully a fresh investigation where we could where authorities can once and for all go after the co-conspirators, go after the gentlemen on Jeffrey Epstein's client list, and let's see if charges could be brought against any of these people. That's really where we need to go right now.
I mean, so I hate to use the word Bible since it's related to Jesus Christ, but The Spider really is kind of the Jeffrey Epstein Bible. You go from start to finish. You spent time at his childhood home to get a sense of what his mindset was like growing up, and where that desire to have power and control and not fame necessarily, but certainly finances came from. Combing through these documents, you did say there were some surprises. Does anything specifically stand out to you? Did anything, kind of knock you out of your socks when you were reading it?
Well, I mean, listen, there was a lot of scandal related to the Sarah Ransom. One of his accusers, her deposition in which she had named, the big boys in this case, the Trumps and the Clintons, and said there was videotape of sexual relations that took place against the will of these girls. And of course, she later had to, as we learned, she had recanted the claims about the videotape. So it made it very murky. But what I'm focused on are some of the names that, that we have heard that came into a little more clarity as possible fresh witnesses that authorities could look after. Certainly one of the names from her deposition is Gwendolyn Beck, who is a public figure. She had dated the disgraced New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez. In the deposition of Virginia Giuffre, we learned that number 7, Gwendolyn Beck, Virginia says, I wasn't trafficked to her. She was part of some of the trafficking. An attorney asked her what she meant about Beck's involvement, to which the victim said she was involved in some of the orgies. So you have that allegation of this woman who's now 65 years old, who Jeffrey Epstein met way back in 1995 through their connections on Wall Street. She was photographed with Epstein. She was photographed with Trump and his then girlfriend Melania. She was part of that inner circle. Where is her deposition? Where is authorities from the Southern District of New York questioning her about what she knew and what took place? So to me, there's work that has to be done. Another name that came up in Sarah Ransom's deposition was a gentleman, a mystery man who has been identified as Peter Lambakis, who was identified as a possible cocaine supplier and possible witness. Oh. Now, where is this man? What does he know? Should authorities be tracking him down? There's still so much work that has to be done. And I'm really hoping that, from all the headlines that took place over the past couple of weeks, from these disclosures, that the investigators in the Southern District here in New York, who successfully brought Ghislaine Maxwell to prosecution and put her behind bars, will go back and look over these unsealed documents and launch a new investigation. I mean, that has to be done. Look at David Copperfield, the magician.
I mean, what a throwback right there, right? I hadn't heard that name in years.
But here you have an individual, and this was greatly upsetting to me, where, he had been a friend of Jeffrey Epstein's. He had done magic tricks for the girls and some of the guests at one of Jeffrey Epstein's parties. You have in a deposition a woman saying that David Copperfield told one of the young girls, are you aware that these girls are hiring other girls, that they're recruiting other girls? So you have information here that David Copperfield was aware of this pyramid scheme way back when. Right. Now, how does he know that? Right. At this point, he has not commented, as far as we know. There's no specific allegations against him, but where did he figure this out? And how does he know this? Did he witness anything? Was this information where he made the disclosure from conversations that he had with Epstein or things that he witnessed himself? Clearly, decades ago, he was in a position to go to authorities and tell them what he knew. Why didn't he do that? Again, what is troubling to me, having investigated this case, is that individuals allegedly like David Copperfield had information way back when that could have been taken to authorities, and he had the name recognition that they would have sat down with him and taken him seriously. Why did he not go to authorities at the time? And also, why did authorities not listen to some of the girls who blew the whistle to the FBI? You take the case of the artist, Maria Farmer, who was abused by Jeffrey Epstein. Her younger 16-year-old sister, Annie Farmer, was also victimized by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Maria Farmer went to contacted the FBI. It took them 10 years to finally get back to her. So we continue to learn more and more as this goes on that there were whistleblowers early on. I wrote the story in my book about the Victoria's Secret model, who Jeffrey Epstein had used his connection with Les Wexner into Victoria's Secret to identify himself as a recruiter. And he ended up groping this woman who went to both the police and authorities and was never taken seriously. You have just a litany of these examples of people who were in the know that could have gone to authorities or did go to authorities to blow the whistle, and nothing was done for so long. And because of that, the victimization and the trafficking of these girls went on for decades.
Now, I mean, would you say that Prince Andrew's name is one of the reasons that this story blew up in the mainstream, and actually, there was some traction that began surrounding these old, expiring allegations?
Well, I mean, listen, Andrew is another fascinating case, and what we do know, and this is troubling to me also, is that to the FBI's credit, once they, because of the Miami Herald series, Me Too, and they finally went and arrested Epstein, and were going to try him here in New York for sex trafficking. While they were looking into that before Jeffrey Epstein's death, the FBI seriously pursued trying to arrange an interview with Prince Andrew, as you know. They for 4 straight months, they pursued him. They tried to talk to his people. His people said that there would be cooperation. There was never cooperation. The Jeffrey Berman, who was then the U.S. attorney, was at wit's end, pulling his hair out, trying to make something happen from the SDNY. They even tried to go through UK authorities with the MLAT, which is the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty, to try to compel him to sit down and speak to them. But Prince Andrew continually denied them any type of cooperation. And what's troubling is that we know that Scotland Yard has information on Prince Andrew. Their detail, the SO14, which is part of Scotland Yard's protective service for the royals, his particular protectors from SO14 were on a boat docked outside of Jeffrey Epstein's island in the Virgin Islands. They had information. Prince Andrew claimed that he was never there. They, for in fact, have records showing that they accompanied him to that island and let him stay there overnight while they stayed on a boat outside the island. There's names of officials from the SO14 that were part of Prince Andrew's detail that have information, whether it was the same officers or other officers. There were Scotland Yard protectors who were with Prince Andrew when he went to Ghislaine Maxwell's townhouse in London for the night when he was when Virginia Roberts Giuffre was put out to him for sexual relations when she was 16 years old. Where are those records? Why aren't those officials being scrutinized over there? How come we haven't seen any of that information? There's a cover-up going on in the UK to obviously control that information.
What's your reaction to the Met saying in relation to these new documents being released that they're not going to investigate it because they don't feel like there's any new information there? Do you have a reaction to that?
I mean, it's appalling that that you have that type of reaction. I'll tell you this. After Jeffrey Epstein's death, one person who did, to me, most of the heavy lifting to try to get at his estate, and really what went on, was the a woman named Denise George, who was the district attorney in the Virgin Islands. She went after Jeffrey Epstein's estate and his company in the Virgin Islands called Southern Trust, which she labeled just a front for sex trafficking and prostitution. And she interviewed employees at Jeffrey Epstein's estate, Little St. James in the Virgin Islands. One employee said that he saw Prince Andrew with young women on a balcony at Jeffrey Epstein's estate and was absolutely sure it was Prince Andrew. And the next morning, Prince Andrew was walking on the grounds going to breakfast or lunch. And he said, hello, your Royal Highness. So you have an employee of Jeffrey Epstein's estate who eyewitnessed Prince Andrew in the company of underage women. You know, why isn't that being investigated? Why isn't the FBI now taking that testimony from Denise George's office in the Virgin Islands and putting something together here and compel Prince Andrew to sit down for an interview? Now, I do think, not to interrupt, but I do think if he were to ever re-enter the United States, that, as one of the accuser's attorneys has said, it's very likely that Prince Andrew could be arrested if he steps on U.S. soil.
Oh, and that's I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the stories that circulates in the UK every once in a while is that he's lost all capability of making money in the UK, that he really is relying on King Charles. So worst case scenario, like Fergie, he'd get on a plane, come over here, and I don't know, start selling blenders on QVC. I don't know what he would do. So that's interesting that you feel like he could potentially be arrested if he came over to the United States. That, I mean, what a vulnerable position he's in. He's got to feel so stuck.
Yeah, I mean, the last time we were aware that he was here was when he was photographed walking in Central Park here in New York with Jeffrey Epstein. I have that photo in my book, The Spider. And
oh, I bet he hates that photo today.
Well, I'm sure, but it's clear that he purposely came to the U.S. when he knew things were falling apart to speak to Epstein. And obviously, we don't know the conversation between the two men as they walked in the park, but you can absolutely bet that, you know, it was part of a cover-up to try in some way to help Prince Andrew.
Right, because I spoke to Andrew Morton about this, the author of Diana, Her True Story, and he said he wrote a book about Prince Andrew shortly after that, and he was at a dinner party, and he met somebody that was a mutual friend of Andrew's, and he said, oh, I've written the first book about Prince Andrew. So his friend said, oh, come over here. Let's get Andrew on the phone. And so they try to call Andrew. Andrew picks up. And this is, again, after Diana, Her True Story. So Andrew Morton is not invited. Andrew Morton is
right.
Nobody wants association with this guy. So the mutual friend says, hey, I'm standing here with Andrew Morton, and he's written a book about you. Prince Andrew hangs up on him and never talks to this individual again. So Andrew Morton's point is, this is not somebody that jumps on a plane to break up with you in person. He'll just change his phone number. I know I asked you for just a few minutes, but I'm having so much fun with you. Can I keep you a little bit longer?
You can keep me as long as you need. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Talking about Andrew with these younger women and there being witnesses on the island, you wonder what his mindset, how could he even remotely think that was an appropriate thing to do? But I've also read you quote Jeffrey Epstein, I believe it was days before his death, maybe, say something to a fellow inmate about how the government's charges were ridiculous because they weren't even younger girls. I mean, can you correct me on that quote and tell me, do you feel a sense of maybe that's Prince Andrew's mindset too? Like, what are you talking about? They're just, they're not children.
Yeah, I'll read you that specific quote because I do think it's important, and to me, it really played into his mindset. One of the former inmates who were in lockup with him. There were two men who were assigned through the suicide prevention there. They were kind of counselors to other inmates. And we do know, as I wrote in the book, that it's gone. The officials haven't acknowledged it, but I'm aware through our investigation that Jeffrey Epstein, that there was another suicide attempt before the night in which he took his life. And in fact, because of that, there were these inmates who were kind of counselors who were assigned to speak to him regularly, find out what his mindset was, make sure he wasn't harboring, dark thoughts. And in one conversation, he said, Epstein made a specific reference to his alleged crimes. He said to me, Miles, I don't know what you've heard, but they are talking about these girls being underage, but they're 15, 16, 17, and 18 years old. They're not 8 or 9 years old. So you have in that quote from Jeffrey Epstein to this other inmate, you have his mindset that, well, I'm not a pedophile. I wasn't with 8 or 9 year olds. These girls were, 15 or 16, which of course still makes him a pedophile, still makes him a sexual predator of young underage girls. But somehow in Jeffrey Epstein's mind, there was a cutoff point. There was a limit. I'm not going to be with 8 and 9 year olds, but it's okay for me to be with young girls who are 15 and 16. Now, you can take that to a shrink, and probably we could talk about that for hours. But obviously, in his mind, what he was doing didn't enter into that realm of sexual abuse of young girls. And you have to also remember that when this was going on, primarily from 1994 to 2004, which was the timeline prosecutors used to convict Ghislaine Maxwell, his partner in crime. Maxwell viewed these girls, as she told a friend who I quoted in the book, that these girls were nothing but trash.
I hate that quote. I honestly, I wanted to throw the book across the room when I read that quote, because it tells you everything about the moral compass of these people, and the cruelty.
Well, exactly. And so when you have Maxwell thinking and viewing these girls as, as trash, disposable, and you have Epstein thinking, well, there's nothing wrong with what I'm doing because, I'm with girls who are older than that. It was a twisted, horrific lifestyle that these two lived for a decade. And I'll get back to one final thought on the age limits. Denise George, that district attorney in the Virgin Islands, after Epstein's death, her investigation also found that Epstein, at the end, when he was living there in the years before his arrest, was bringing girls to the island as young as 11 years old.
Oh, my God.
Young as 11 years old.
My stomach turned. Oh, my goodness.
And he was using modeling agents, friends like Jean-Luc Brunel, who also took his life behind bars in Paris. He was importing girls from these modeling agents that he knew, trafficking these girls from Eastern Europe and bringing them, staying out of the U.S. mainland, out of his home in Palm Beach or New York, but bringing the girls, ferrying them to the Virgin Islands. And these girls were becoming younger and younger. And that was his life at the very end.
Oh, wow. Not learning his lesson, clearly. I know people are going to ask me, and I apologize in advance for asking you this. But I also had, as I stutter on, I also had this thought while reading the book, that people are going to ask me why I didn't ask you if Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. So I'm asking you that. But also, I think that the answer, your justification for why you believe he did in fact kill himself, I wonder Do you believe that Jeffrey Epstein, a control freak, which is why
Yes.
one of the reasons you believe he ended his life, do you
Yes.
believe that being a control freak is one of the reasons? I mean, there's no justification, obviously, but one of the reasons he pursued younger women, because that you can't control women your own age. You can't control women that have their own careers. You can't control women that have their own money. And you might be like, none of us are ever going to know the answer. And that's a very fair answer. But as I read that and thought about him ending his life because he no longer had control over the situation, I wondered, in his warped, weird mind, was he attracted to younger girls because he was always going to have the upper hand?
Well, it really was like a cult. He for the sexual relations, for the abuse, for the rapes, but he would also, he'd also watch movies, and he would want the girls to sit at his feet while he was watching films. There was this need to absolutely control these girls, to have them do everything he said, and he treated his staff that way. The temperatures in his bedroom had to be a very certain degrees. He had to have X amount of towels. The employees couldn't look at him on the island. They had to turn away. All of that began caving when he was behind bars. He wasn't internally, I think, a very strong individual. He completely fell apart behind bars. Interestingly, Maxwell, for everything she went through behind bars, was made of much tougher stock and survived that and refused to do a deal in the end, and went to was convicted when she had the opportunity to do some type of a deal. But he completely unraveled. We know that he saw the end. He saw how this was going to go, that he was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. 2 days before his death, he had his will rewritten. He brought lawyers into jail to change some facets in his will. The day before he took his life, there was a very damaging set of documents from the Maxwell defamation case that were unveiled. Judge ruled that they would be unsealed in court, which opened up all kinds of fresh legal documents related to Prince Andrew and some of the other men who have been named. He really saw the writing on the wall that there was no way out. And I think that he knew that if he ended up in a federal lockup, that because of what he did in terms of being a predator with young underage girls, that he was going to be brutalized by other inmates there. And I think that his last act of self-control that he had was to basically wave off the authorities and say, I'm not. You're not going to get me sitting in a trial. You're not going to get me. You're not going to put stick pins in me to give up names. And I'm just walking away from all of that. And I do believe that despite all the conspiracy theories that he took his life. And we did an extensive investigation in the book. And you have to also consider the mechanics of the jail. While that jail was later closed down by the Bureau of Prisons because of the conditions there and the poor security, in fact, the mechanisms to open the Epstein's jail cell and to gain access to the shoe that he was in would have required
David Copperfield.
Well, David Copperfield or the officials who were in the main jail control room to have open doors to let individuals onto that floor. You would have been talking about a massive conspiracy. It wasn't only had to do with, we know about the two guards on his floor who supposedly fell asleep that night and weren't doing their rounds and were later reprimanded by authorities, but to get into Jeffrey Epstein's cell overnight would have required officials inside the main jail control room, the locked jail control room, to actually open doors to let a mystery person into Jeffrey Epstein's cell. And it's just, it's a great story. But I do think that at the end of the day, he took his own life. And another thing that doesn't make any sense is if, say, he was attacked, or say someone had done this to him behind bars, where are the defensive wounds on his hands or his fingers? Even Michael Baden, the esteemed investigator, medical examiner, who Jeffrey Epstein's brother Mark brought in to conduct and observe the autopsy, had to admit in his documentation that there were no defensive wounds on Jeffrey Epstein's hand or his fingers. So, I do conclude that he took his life. However, as we spoke to individuals related to the Bureau of Prisons who told us that Jeffrey Epstein was put in a position to take his life, that no one actually strangled him, but he was put in a position. Where was the new inmate who was supposed to come in and be with him in that jail cell? That didn't happen. Why were there so many additional bed sheets that were put into Jeffrey Epstein's cell that allowed him to rip those up to make a noose? If Jeffrey Epstein was also a risk for suicide, why did he have a sleep apnea machine that had a long cord attached to it, in which he could have strangled himself that way? They pretty much, I can't accuse an individual of taking his life, but I think the Bureau of Prisons and the MCC look the other way. And if Jeffrey Epstein were to take his life, for the most part, they could care less.
Wow. Yeah. Somebody clearly dropped the ball.
Yeah.
I'd love your personal opinion on, because there's two conflicting stories. Prince Andrew tells the BBC that it's Ghislaine Maxwell that introduced him to Jeffrey Epstein, where Ghislaine Maxwell says that she is not the person that introduced Prince Andrew to Jeffrey Epstein. These two seem to be on each other's sides. Neither one will rat the other out. But this is a conflicting story. What do you think that's about? And do you think Ghislaine would ever turn on Prince Andrew? Why is she so protective of him? Or does she just want to say innocent across the board, so I'm not going to go there?
Well, I think Maxwell, from her depositions, from the court case in which she was convicted, I think she's a pathological liar. I think Prince Andrew is a liar. He won't man up and admit to what went on there. They're both lying. They're both lying to protect one another. And I think at this point, as I said earlier, I think that Ghislaine comes from much tougher stock than Jeffrey. He completely fell apart behind bars, where the hatred built up inside of her that how dare authorities put her behind bars, that she, in her mind, believes that she did nothing wrong. It's the same attitude. It's the same mindset as, oh, these girls are just trash. I could care less what happens to any of them. She knew him. She knew Prince Andrew. Her father, Robert Maxwell, the press baron, owner of the Daily Mirror in England. I mean, she knew all these people. She knew these people from years and years back. There's no question in my mind that she was the one who introduced Andrew to Jeffrey Epstein. Epstein had made connections in the United States. He knew wealthy and powerful individuals, but it really was Ghislaine's Rolodex that really opened up a really new world for Jeffrey Epstein in terms of making connections.
Yeah, I mean, credibility to be standing.
Andrew, Bill Clinton, Trump. Epstein knew Trump from being neighbors in Palm Beach, but she was able to bring into their circle so many wealthy and powerful individuals. And they used Prince Andrew. They called him the useful idiot. They took advantage of him because they knew that having Prince Andrew in their pocket would open up the door to so many additional connections. You have Ghislaine and Kevin Spacey partying at Buckingham Palace, sitting on the ceremonial throne. You have Jeffrey and Ghislaine attending parties, in England at these places. We haven't, as far as we know, they never met, or Epstein never met the Queen, but they came relatively close.
It's just so vulgar and disgraceful and, hard. It's so hard, I've said before, to justify on my end when I'm trying to talk around it. When we were on News Nation, Leland said, why are they still defending him? I wish I would have said, I know my eyes just fell out of my face because I was like, I don't know. I wish I would have said that I truly feel like the king made a promise to the Queen, but I really do struggle with the defense of them. Do you think that they're looking at some of the holes in Virginia Giuffre's story? Do you think that because there have been some errors, she has said, I'm mistaken, I take certain things back. Are they holding on to those with dear life, hoping that none of this is valid? Or do you think that they have to look at, something like the spider and go, wow, there are some witnesses, there are some really good points, there's some proof here?
Yeah, I mean, those are all very good points. I mean, the prosecutors from the Southern District didn't use Virginia as a witness in court against Ghislaine Maxwell because of some of the inconsistencies from depositions that she gave, things that she wrote in her unpublished memoir, interviews she gave to Sharon Churcher at the Sunday Mail, who broke open the first story about Prince Andrew's involvement, who I had access to her notes, exclusive notes, when I wrote my book. There's no perfect witness. There's no perfect victim. You have to understand that when you're dealing with young girls and young women, they're not going to remember all the specifics. They're going to get things wrong in the various timelines. This is something that Alan Dershowitz, when he was defending Jeffrey Epstein in Florida, back during the Palm Beach investigation, first the Palm Beach police and then the FBI, he embarked with his team on victim shaming. They attempted to look into these girls to try to turn up information that they had may have used drugs, that they were promiscuous, that there were stories about them from other kids down there. They really went and attacked the victims and made these young innocent victims into prostitutes. That was their effort to try to get Jeffrey Epstein off the hook. But I am, as I said earlier, there are individuals beyond Virginia, beyond some of the other, Sarah Ransom, who also now has acknowledged inaccuracies in things that she said. But what about the employee, the adult employee that Denise George found in the Virgin Islands, who saw Prince Andrew there? What about this woman Beck, who we know allegedly took part in orgies? Why aren't they questioning David Copperfield? What did he know at the time, and how did he learn what he did? There are adults in this story that could be questioned, where some of their testimony could strengthen a potential case against the co-conspirators, the four women that Jeffrey Epstein used as assistants down in Florida, who were given immunity at the time of his non-prosecution agreement with Alexandra Acosta. As I said, we're learning so much more. There's so many more pieces of the puzzle, and new names are emerging. And it's important now that prosecutors don't waste time, that they jump on the momentum from this from these disclosures and start doing a fresh round of interviews. We know that there's officials in the government, Senator Marsha Blackburn, who is taking this seriously, who wants to see the additional flight logs that haven't been released. So you have officials in the government, and again, there's politicizing going on, and you know, I don't know how you get around that, but if there's still an interest to prosecute individuals, then we have to let go of the politicizing, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and let's find out if there's individuals who can be brought to justice in this case besides Ghislaine Maxwell. That's where this case has to go now.
Do you have any information on Fergie's loan from Jeffrey Epstein? I thought it was interesting because we do know at one point he made the comment to an employee, you know, if the Duchess of York ever calls, get me on the phone immediately. Like she was a priority to him. And I feel like there are a lot of people that will sit back and go, I don't think Andrew did anything wrong, but it's guilt by association because Jeffrey Epstein definitely did. So how does someone like Sarah Ferguson walk away, you know, with clean hands when there was money exchanged there? Obviously, he had leverage over her when he allowed her to borrow money from him. It's that's a favor that she now owes him.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, that was Jeffrey. That was Jeffrey's MO. I mean, his whole way he ran his operation, his trafficking operation, was to do favors for the rich and powerful and to use them. He would dole out these men to other men to provide money for different charities, and he would cross mingle all of these individuals. And so many of these men, now come forward and say, I should have never done any business with him. You have the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who Jeffrey Epstein set up to do business with Les Wexner. The billionaire who really financed Epstein early on, even though Wexner claims he knew nothing of Jeffrey Epstein's dark side. And there's been accusations against Wexner of sexual abuse, which of course he has denied, like all of these other men. But you had Jeffrey connecting all of these people. Prince Andrew with rich and powerful associates, loaning money out or giving money to charities. He gave money to, as you point out, to Fergie. I think that the figure was probably somewhere less than $30,000, if I recall. But it was money that for Epstein it was a drop in a bucket. It was pocket change, but it was gaining favors, pulling people on his side. And that's what he did throughout these decades. And to me, that's the most fascinating thing in writing the book, The Spider, really was seeing how Jeffrey Epstein could move between this dark world of the sexual abuse and rape of these young girls, the torture of these girls, behind closed doors, and also a few hours later sit down and on the phone with top scientists, Harvard executives, politicians, getting these individuals sitting at the dinner table with these people, and move between this world of predator abuse and this world of sitting among the rich and famous, sitting with the Bill Gates of the world. You had so many people, it's mind-blowing, who were like moths to a flame, who were willing to embrace Jeffrey Epstein, even after the Florida conviction for solicitation of a prostitution of a minor. And you had all these individuals who would show up at Jeffrey Epstein's townhouse in New York and sit around and talk about financial deals and charities, and Epstein would try to help these people with tax shelters and things. It is quite unbelievable in terms of how he commingled the two worlds that he lived in.
Does it remind you of Weinstein a little bit? Because it's almost like they need something, they need to have a real job. They need to have real success. Although people would say that Jeffrey Epstein had like one client that was relevant and only one real quote unquote success or job. But it almost reminds me of Weinstein, where you distract from the sin by actually being legitimate or good at something and keeping the company of someone like Bill Gates, because that gives you credibility. And because you're over here doing charity with Bill Gates, certainly nobody's going to think that you would take girls to a private island and violate them.
Right.
I mean, Harvey Weinstein was taking girls to his hotel room and also accepting Oscars, you know?
Yeah. And the two of them were friends. As bizarre as this story is, the two of them were friends. I have a photograph in my book at a costume party. You have a photograph of Harvey Weinstein in costume standing next to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in England at a costume party. Jeffrey Epstein invited Harvey Weinstein to his townhouse in Paris, where Weinstein allegedly was receiving a massage and then became abusive to the girl. And then Jeffrey Epstein told a friend, he's a pig. That's a quote that I have in my book. He called Harvey Weinstein a pig and then severed their relationship because Epstein said that Harvey was irate and violent to one of his girls. So
maybe too much of a liability there, because if that happened too often, the girls are going to start talking. The girls are going to revolt. You know, you can't have people that are so overtly abusive. It's almost like you have to have the people that are manipulative and calm and stay below the radar around them. I don't want to keep you too much longer because you've been so sweet and generous with your time, but you have a fascinating background. And I was reading about, you helping launch tabloids and chasing after Barbara Streisand and Don Johnson. Did you have a history at all with the royal family before Prince Andrew? Did you study Charles and Diana? Were you a part of the team that helped break that relationship dissolving? Because tabloids were really ahead of the game back then. What's your history with the royal family?
Well, certainly. I was a managing editor at an old Fox syndicated TV show called The Current Affair, which
so fun. I loved that show. Show.
Maureen O'Boyle was the host at the time when I was with the show. It launched Maury Povich before his own show, and he was the host of ACA. At the time I was there in the 90s, we were covering the breakup of Charles and Diana. And we were doing that story every single night. The interviews with the Andrew Mortons of the world, and that whole cavalcade of that whole royal circus of the News of the World reporters who were investigating, that we later learned were actually phone hacking to get the inside scoops, and that crazy, bizarre Fleet Street war that was taking place every day between the London Sun and the Daily Mirror, and the the mail and all the papers over there. It was what fascinated me most about the Diana Charles divorce was the incredible interest here in the United States. And
how are we so emotionally invested in a monarchy that didn't belong to us anymore? Was it Diana's appeal? Was it her sweet spirit? Was it her sex appeal because she was beautiful? I don't know.
It was everything that she had gone through, and certainly that princess quality that she had, the ability for Americans just to absolutely fall in love with her, and evil Charles carrying on, the affair behind her, behind Diana's back, as Diana said.
Unfathomable, yeah.
Three in the marriage. It was a sensational story. It was the biggest story. I covered all the scandals over the years: Michael Jackson, O.J. Simpson, but certainly nothing, I think, really resonated with the public like the Diana and Charles, and it was just so bizarre. It was just that circus that we were living in at the time in the 90s in terms of covering that story, was fascinating. And that really was my first real connection with coverage of the royals.
Was it a no-brainer? Did you see spikes in viewership when you had Diana and Charles headlining the show?
Of course. That's why, the tabloid TV shows at the time, I was involved with The Current Affair. We had Competition and Inside Edition and Hard Copy. Again, this was a time when we didn't have the internet. You didn't have the constant 24-hour run of Facebook and TikTok and Twitter, and where were Americans getting that fill at that time? They were getting it from TV shows like the one I was working for, where we were going well beyond the couple of minutes that the nightly, Dan Rather was talking for 2 minutes, at the end of the nightly news each night. We were providing all the down and dirty, and
so they were sitting in it. And this is like before we had direct on demand. So people are literally making sure they're at home at X amount of time because they need to be on their couch with their remote control, tuning in to see the latest on Di and Prince Charles. That's so.
You had to be there.
Right. Yeah,
it was appointment television. If you weren't on your couch watching, you missed it.
Then you went to the hair salon and you guys talked about it. And you knew you had to get home the next day to find out what the latest was. I love that. That's so funny. Yeah. What do you think about the chaos surrounding Harry and Meghan? Do you see similarities in the Charles and Diana chaos when it comes to just people's need for new information about them?
There's no question that Meghan really kind of exploded besides the Prince Andrew's scandal with Jeffrey Epstein. There's no question in my mind that the scrutiny on the royals is because of Meghan Markle and that dynamic and the dynamic between her and the rest of the royal family. And you have Prince Harry, who has grown up with, and rightfully so, a giant grudge against Fleet Street, against the photographers who were chasing, Diana in the tunnel the night of the accident that took her life. In Harry's mind, he holds the media responsible for his mother's death, and that has now carried on in the continual lawsuits that he's filed over against the tabloids in England that are still going on today, and certainly the leaks about and the headlines over Meghan and in the media. And my belief is that they continue to dig a hole for themselves with the Oprah interviews and the books and the documentaries. But this is the world in which they live in. They feel that this is how they're going to put their side of the story out. But in addition to that, Harry is doing it in a courtroom, and he's trying to get even with the media, and he's succeeding because there's been judgments against some of the newspapers that he's been suing.
Do you see any similarities in Harry and Andrew in the sense that, there is something about the spare that they have, because they don't have a specific job to look forward to, they tend to be a little lost. They can be a little reckless. Is there something, about the spare that is lacking, that needs to be corrected in the future, so that even Princess Margaret, she liked the bottle, she loved to party, that all sorts of rumors about her and Mick Jagger and all of these other characters. Yeah. It just seems like they have everything at the palm of their hands and no real purpose. So sometimes they can get lost, or they make some mistakes.
Well, listen, I think Harry's a lot smarter than Prince Andrew.
That's so nice. That is so nice of you to say. That's going to be the headline.
I think he is so much smarter than Prince Andrew. But again, their lifestyles growing up were similar. I mean, Andrew was known as Randy Andy. He loved the party, loved to go to the clubs. One of the appeals that Jeffrey Epstein immediately saw in Prince Andrew was, here's a guy who loves the party, and we are going to, I write in my book how Epstein and Ghislaine set up a night for Andrew at this wild nightclub in Miami, so he could go there and he could dance and go crazy. And they saw this guy coming a mile away, and they knew that this was a guy who liked women, who liked young women, who liked the party, and that they absolutely seized on that to take advantage of him. And Harry grew up. He was the one who was making the headlines, in the old days. Not William, but Harry, in terms of his reckless pursuits of dating at the time, and all the mischief that he got up to.
The naked Vegas romp. Yeah. I'll ask you one more question.
They're similar. Yeah.
I'll ask you one more question, then I'll let you go, because you have been so gracious with your time. Do you think Prince Andrew has the ability to sweat or not?
Oh, I do think he has an ability to sweat. I mean, that was the as they say, the scrutiny that came down on him from the interview that he gave on Newsnight in the UK, where he was questioned about Virginia, and said, well, I would never be dancing because I have a condition that causes me to sweat. It causes me to.
He said he would never be sweating while dancing because he has
right, because the condition. But in fact, doctors who were interviewed afterwards said it's completely the opposite. That the condition he had would make him perspire even more. So, I mean, as I said, Jeffrey and Ghislaine viewed him as the useful idiot, and that is Prince Andrew as we know him. But it is still so serious as to what he was involved in, and he obviously knows a lot more. He may know specific details about some of the other men, things that he witnessed, things that Jeffrey or Ghislaine told him. That's why he needs to be interrogated by the FBI.
Perfect. All right. Well, Barry, The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell is available wherever you purchase books, but I'm going to put a link at todiefordaily.com, and I'll put a link as well in the description of this podcast episode. It's a fabulous read and a pretty terrifying one, if we're being honest. Thank you so much for your time today. You've done an amazing job of really getting underneath this individual's skin and getting to know the ins and outs of a true spider web. There are so many tentacles when it comes to this case. So congratulations on all of your success. And I will continue to follow you throughout this process as you stay on